and welcome to our 10th video in our Through My Bible series this year. You finished up the book of Leviticus this past week and moved into the book of Numbers. And as you move along through Numbers, things are going to get much more action-packed to this coming week. But before we get too far, let's go back and just review what you had read at the end of Leviticus and the first few chapters of Numbers. I'd asked you to consider the question, what previews of Jesus' work do we see at the end of Leviticus and at the beginning of Numbers? And though in the end we see that red line of Christ's work woven all through the Old Testament, I think there are a couple of things that really stand out. First of all, in Leviticus chapter 25, there is the picture of the Redeemer, the one who buys back the land on the occasion of the year of Jubilee. And if you take that in connection with what's later said in Deuteronomy, that then becomes the impetus for what happens in the book of Ruth that we'll read in a few months, with Boaz redeeming the land and also marrying Ruth, and ultimately it then becomes a picture of Christ as our Redeemer who buys us back from sin, death, and hell. And then in Numbers chapter 6, you have the picture of the Nazarite, someone who takes a special vow to God. And though Jesus himself wasn't a Nazarite in that sense that we're told, we do have some examples of people who were. Samson was a Nazarite. It appears John the Baptist was a Nazarite. Jesus certainly lived up to the calling of a Nazarite, though, in his total dedication to God and his word. So, and then also looking at the New Testament readings where you finished up the book, the letter to the Hebrews, I'd asked you to think about this. How does the end of the book of Hebrews help to explain the value of books like Leviticus and Numbers that we might sometimes find a little difficult to plow through? And we're thankful for the insight that we have from the letter to the Hebrews, because, well, we can now more fully appreciate Jesus' work as our high priest, because we see how helpless we would have been underneath the Old Testament covenant law that God gave Israel, as they were also meant to feel as well. And so they could look to God as the one who would one day provide someone to fully obey the law for them and to pay the penalty for their sins against that law. And then especially when you think of Hebrews chapter 11, you have all of these Old Testament examples of faith, people of faith. And these people of faith all lived underneath that burden of Old Testament law, which makes their faith shine that much more brightly, too, when we see how difficult their lives were in comparison with ours. Now, moving forward, you're going to read the entire letter to Colossians, and also move on, as we'd said before, in the very action-packed section of the book of Numbers. In the book of Numbers, you're going to see God's people and God's leaders, Moses and Aaron, face all kinds of opposition. And so I'd suggest to you this week that perhaps if you are in the habit of taking notes on your readings, you might want to make a list of the bad guys in Numbers that you come across. And then ask yourself this question: what did all these bad guys have in common? Maybe some of them we'll see as bad guys not for the entirety of the time that we're looking at them, but just for a particular incident. But wherever we find them, what do all of these bad guys have in common? Then as we look at Colossians is just extra meaningful once you've read Leviticus, and you see, especially in Colossians chapter 2, the glory of what Jesus did by rescuing us from all of that Old Testament law. But that wasn't the primary purpose for which God inspired Paul to write Colossians. You don't have it spelled out necessarily very clearly in just a few verses in Colossians, but ask yourself as you're going through that entire epistle of Paul, what was it that prompted Paul to write this letter to the Colossians? And we'll talk about that then next time. God's blessings on your reading, and we'll look forward to seeing you and talking about Colossians and the meat of the book of Numbers.